Hello, I'm Simon Dudley. Today I'm going to talk about some of the work we're doing at Accession Events around competitive analysis. Our overall goal is to help organizations compete more effectively. And that means a lot more than simply talking about products. One product against another seems to be the way the world has done competitive intelligence for a long time. And there's a lot more to it than that. So let's get into it and I'll show you what we've been thinking about. So, according to Sun Tzu, knowing your enemy and knowing yourself will allow you to win 100 battles. Most organizations don't do that. So I've been thinking about this for a little while now, and I believe there are basically 12 ways of thinking about your competitor and ultimately yourselves, which will give you a competitive advantage and let you beat your competition. So one of the things that's really interesting to me is that most companies, most organizations really don't think about their competitors very much. They think about themselves, and they think about themselves almost exclusively. In fact, really the only organizations I can think of that do a good job of looking at their competitors are governments. And governments, of course, have spy agencies and the NSA and MI6 and all of those other organizations. And we're not suggesting for a moment that organizations need to set up some sort of James Bond type activity, but there's certainly a lot more that can be done than simply looking at somebody else's press release. Now, one of the things to consider is that most organizations play half-court tennis. So what do I mean by that? The idea of half-court tennis is this idea that you simply look at yourselves, you look at your own organization, you look at your own products and services, and you only look at those. What you don't do is look at how your competitors might compete against those. Governments certainly do that. Every time they consider a diplomatic or an organizational change, they consider what all their rivals out there are going to do as well. Very few companies do that, and I think that's something that needs to be fixed. So let's look at how organizations do it today. So they generally look at backwards looking data with zero context and basically add their own narrative to what the graph says. Now, it might be right, but it also might well be wrong. So the idea that you can work out what's going on in the future by looking backwards and then guessing what the graph tells you is a bit of an issue. The next way of considering it is the old Magic Quadrant or its equivalent from lots of other organizations. Now, let's be honest. Is that really analysis or is that a marketing gimmick or marketing material? I haven't met an organization yet that if they have a Magic Quadrant or one of the others that are out there, if they're in the top right-hand corner, they publish it. If they're not in the top right-hand corner, they pay their analysts more money to make them be in the top right-hand corner. It's not really used as any kind of competitive material. It's simply used as marketing. And then organizations come up with competitive matrices like this. And you look at it and you think to yourself, that's great. And we can look at all these numbers and we can work out which is best because the highest number wins, right? Now, this is obviously meaningless. But when I say obviously, it's not so obvious that companies don't use it all the time. I would argue it's measurable but meaningless. Why are companies spending their time doing this? If you can't even define what best is, how are you meant to be best? And how do you get out there and tell the world that your product or service is better because it has 8 microphones or 3 microphones or 97 microphones or a slightly higher price or a lower price? This is ridiculous and meaningless, and organizations really need to stop it if they're actually going to get out there and do some useful work. So I believe true competitive analysis looks at 12 different ways of thinking of yourselves and your competition, and we'll get into the details with some examples for each. So these 12 vectors include finance, threats, the good, fast, cheap triangle, the org chart, the pitch, the downstream business model, their overall business model, their alliances, their upstream business model, their portfolio of products, their ESG story, and their 5-year plan. So what does that actually mean in the real world? Let's get into each one of these. Let's start with finance.